I've played a lot of Souls-like games on PS5, and some of them pushed me harder than I expected. In this video, I'm ranking the ones that stood out the most: the good, the bad, and the unforgettable. Here's my personal tier list based on how each game actually felt to play. Mortal Shell is one of those Souls-like games that gives you a dark world, tough enemies, and almost no real explanation for anything. Even after playing a lot, I still wasn't fully sure who my character was or why this place was falling apart, but the gameplay itself kept me interested. The shell system is a smart idea, letting me jump into different warrior bodies and change my playstyle without dealing with complicated stats. Combat feels weighty, and the hardened mechanic saved me in so many close calls. The game is short and a bit too vague, but the atmosphere and the solid combat carried the experience for me. That's why I place Mortal Shell in the good tier. Darksiders III was a strange experience for me. The game finally brings back the series after years of uncertainty, and Fury is a fun character with her sharp attitude and whip-based combat. But the shift toward a Souls-like style doesn't always land cleanly. The story gives enough background to keep you going, but it never feels as strong or exciting as the earlier games. Combat has some cool ideas with the different hollows and elemental combos, and the boss fights are easily the best part, but the world design and checkpoints can get frustrating. The game looks colorful and the exploration has moments I enjoyed, but the overall experience feels uneven good ideas mixed with rough edges. That's why I placed Darksiders III in the mediocre tier. Hellpoint is one of those Souls-like games that pulls you in even when you're not sure why. The story explains almost nothing, and the world gives you very little context, but exploring the space station and fighting through its creepy halls still feels strangely addictive. Combat is familiar but solid, and the game has a few cool ideas like accretion storms and the aggressive healing system that pushes you to stay on the offensive. Some bosses are simple, the runs back to them can be long, and the camera has its moments, but the overall challenge kept me hooked. It doesn't reinvent the genre, and it definitely feels rough around the edges, yet there's something compelling about its atmosphere and constant sense of danger. That's why I place Hellpoint in the good tier. Lies of P really surprised me. It takes the classic Souls formula and mixes it with a dark, twisted Pinocchio story set in the city of Krat, and the result feels fresh and full of personality. The world is haunting, the characters are interesting, and the game actually tells its story instead of hiding everything behind vague text. Combat is tight and timing-based, with parries, stagger attacks, and weapon parts you can mix and match to create your own style. The bosses are tough, creative, and some of the hardest I've faced outside of From Software's games. It does have a few sudden difficulty spikes, but the atmosphere, music, and overall polish make up for it. Lies of P is one of the strongest Souls-likes I've played in years, which is why I put it in the great tier. Mandragora Whispers of the Witch Tree was a mixed experience for me, but still enjoyable overall. The game starts strong with a great intro, a dark world, and some surprisingly good voice acting that really sets the tone. As an Inquisitor, the story kept me interested, even though the writing can be a bit frustrating and my character often feels clueless. Combat is simple and leans more toward basic dodging and hitting than true Souls-like depth, and the skill tree and classes don't offer as much variety as they should. But the world is fun to explore, the art is lovely, and some bosses look great even if they aren't very challenging. It's not a standout Souls-like, but it's solid, stylish, and worth playing, which is why I place Mandragora in the good tier. Bloodborne is one of those games that truly earns its reputation. Playing it for the first time on PS5, I instantly understood why people still talk about it a decade later. The world of Yharnam pulls you in with its gothic atmosphere, twisted monsters, and storytelling that makes you piece things together as you explore. The combat is fast, aggressive, and incredibly satisfying once you learn the timing of dodges and gun parries. The level design is brilliant too, packed with shortcuts, secrets, and areas that loop back in surprising ways. And when the game shifts from classic gothic horror into full cosmic madness, it becomes something unforgettable. Bloodborne feels unique, bold, and endlessly atmospheric, and that's exactly why I place it in the masterpiece tier. AI Limit is one of those Souls-likes that doesn't reinvent anything, but still ends up being a really fun ride. From the start, it feels familiar crystals instead of souls, branches instead of bonfires, but the futuristic android style gives it a cool identity. The combat is the highlight for me. Perfect parries, big weapon variety, flashy magic, and a system where your shield, stamina, and magic all share the same resource. It keeps fights aggressive and engaging. The levels are well designed, the atmosphere is stylish, and exploring each area scratched that classic Souls-like itch. It doesn't push the genre forward and some technical issues hold it back, but the core gameplay is strong and genuinely enjoyable. That's why I place AI Limit in the great tier. Blasphemous II has a strong identity and a beautiful grim world, but my experience with it was mixed. The new weapons, traversal abilities, and Metroidvania-style puzzles are great ideas on paper, and the world is packed with eerie religious imagery that gives it a unique vibe. But the game often left me feeling lost, with no clear path forward, and the overcomplicated terminology didn't help. Combat looks stylish, but once multiple enemies pile up, things get messy fast, and stun locking becomes more frustrating than fun. There's variety and ambition here, but the flow and clarity just aren't consistent. Blasphemous II improves a lot over the first game, yet it still struggles with pacing and readability, which is why I place it in the mediocre tier. Wuchang Fallen Feathers impressed me more than I expected. The setting alone, a dark, twisted take on the late Ming Dynasty, gives the game a haunting atmosphere I don't see often in Souls-likes. Exploring its world felt rewarding, with smart level design, tons of branching routes, and environments that slowly became more unique and memorable the deeper I went. The combat starts simple but grows into something fast, flexible, and really satisfying once you unlock more weapons, spells, and abilities. Bosses are tough and aggressive, but learning their patterns and building my own playstyle felt great. The only real downside for me was the poor optimization, which held the experience back. Even then, the world, combat, and style won me over, and that's why I place Wuchang Fallen Feathers in the excellent tier. Nioh Remastered reminded me why this series hit so hard. The first Nioh always felt a bit rough to me back on PS4, but running it on PS5 with sharper visuals, smoother gameplay, and fast load times makes a huge difference. It still lacks some of the amazing mechanics introduced in Nioh 2, like yokai transformations and burst counters, and the story isn't as strong as the sequel, but the core combat is as brutal and rewarding as ever. The weapon variety, the loot, the magic, and the sheer amount of build freedom kept me hooked all over again. Boss fights feel like real victories, and the DualSense feedback adds weight to every clash. As a full remaster, it isn't perfect, but the gameplay easily carries it, which is why I place Nioh Remastered in the great tier. Remnant 2 is a game I enjoyed a lot, even though it isn't perfect. I really liked how every world, dungeon, and boss is randomly generated because it kept the whole playthrough feeling fresh and unpredictable. The shooting feels tight, the weapons are fun to experiment with, and I liked building my character around different archetypes and mutators. But at the same time, the story barely lands since everything is so procedural, and sometimes the game feels a bit too chaotic for its own good. Some systems also feel a little limited, especially compared to how creative the worlds are. Still, the sense of discovery, mystery, and variety kept me invested, and that's why I put Remnant 2 in the good tier. Code Vein was one of those games I really tried to enjoy, but it just never clicked for me. The world and ideas are interesting, and the build system with blood codes has potential, but the actual experience feels messy. The combat is loose, the backstabs and parries feel inconsistent, and the camera during boss fights drove me crazy. The long cutscenes and slow memory walking sections completely killed the pace, and even the bosses rarely felt rewarding. Visually, it leans more toward an anime style that doesn't really match the tone it's going for, and the performance issues didn't help either. I can see why some people like it, but for me, Code Vein ended up being frustrating more than fun, so I'm placing it in the trash tier. Long Fallen Dynasty was a mixed experience for me. The combat is fast, stylish, and really tough in that classic Team Ninja way, and when the parries click, it feels great. But everything around the combat just didn't land. The story is forgettable, the characters didn't grab me, and the voice acting and lip syncing often took me out of the moment. The morale system is unique, but the levels felt samey after a while, and the game throws so much at you early on that it can feel messy rather than deep. I still enjoyed some of the fights and the fluid combat, but as a whole, Long felt more frustrating than satisfying, so I'm placing it in the mediocre tier. Steelrising was a pleasant surprise for me. The setting alone, an alternate French Revolution filled with killer automatons, pulled me in right away. Exploring Paris, finding hidden paths, and unlocking new traversal tools like the grappling hook made the world fun to move through. The combat isn't perfect. It can feel clunky, and some animations lock you in longer than they should, but once I got used to it, I still enjoyed the challenge. The assist mode also helped smooth out the rougher parts. The The world building, atmosphere, and unique style carried the experience for me, even if the gameplay isn't as polished as bigger Souls-like titles. That's why I place Steelrising in the good tier. Salt and Sanctuary is one of the few 2D Souls-likes that genuinely captured that same tension I felt in the real Dark Souls games. Every step forward matters. Every small enemy can kill you if you're careless, and reaching a new sanctuary always feels like relief after a long, stressful run. What really stood out to me was the constant dread choosing between two paths and worrying I'd lose all my salt if I picked wrong. The tight, spacing-based combat works surprisingly well in 2D, even if a few boss fights get chaotic. I loved discovering shortcuts and looping back to familiar areas, and the world design kept pulling me in. It's not perfect, but it's one of the best Souls-like experiences outside of From Software, so I'm comfortable placing it in the great tier. Black Myth Wukong impressed me almost immediately. The world feels like a living mix of Chinese mythology, dark fantasy, and pure style, and every area has something memorable waiting for you. What surprised me most was just how good the boss design is. Almost every fight feels unique, and the game keeps a strong pace without ever getting boring. The combat is fast, smooth, and all about dodging and punishing, and switching stances or using spells adds a lot of depth without overwhelming you. Even the visuals and music hit hard, making the whole journey feel epic. A few bosses were tough spikes, but nothing that ruined the experience. For me, this is easily one of the strongest Souls-inspired action games I've played, which is why I'm putting Black Myth Wukong in the excellent tier. Lords of the Fallen 2023 surprised me in a good way. It borrows heavily from Dark Souls, sometimes a little too closely, but when everything clicks, it's one of the better Souls-likes I've played. I loved the art style, the religious horror vibe, and the whole dual-world mechanic with the Umbral Realm. Combat feels weighty and deliberate, and there's a huge amount of weapons, spells, and gear to play around with. But the game also loves cheap ambushes, troll enemy placements, and sudden boss fights you can stumble into without warning. Even with those frustrations, I still had a great time, and that's why I'm putting it in the good tier. The Demon's Souls remake reminded me why this game is so special. Even after all these years, exploring Boletaria again with modern visuals and sound felt incredible. Bluepoint kept the soul of the original intact, while the PS5's visuals, audio, and DualSense feedback made every fight feel sharper and more intense. The variety across the archstones still stands out, and finding the right gear for each world is just as rewarding as I remember. Some old issues remain, a few messy hitboxes and odd AI moments, but overall, this remake delivers the best version of a classic. For me, it easily earns a spot in the great tier. Thymesia had some interesting ideas, and at first I was excited because it leans more toward Bloodborne than Dark Souls. The combat is fast, stylish, and the plague weapon system is actually pretty cool when it works. But the more I played, the more its problems started pulling me out. Enemies can hit you in the middle of your combos, bosses slide around the arena with weird tracking, and the story is barely held together. The world looks atmospheric, but it all starts to feel samey, and going back to old areas for side missions wasn't very rewarding. There are a few great moments, but overall, Thymesia just doesn't reach the level it's aiming for, which is why I'm placing it in the mediocre tier. Elden Ring is the game that completely took over my life when I first played it. It feels familiar if you've played Dark Souls, but the open world takes everything to a whole new level. I was constantly getting pulled off the main path because every cliff, cave, and ruin had something worth finding. The freedom is insane. If an area was too hard, I just explored somewhere else and came back stronger. The boss variety is huge, the world is unforgettable, and the sense of discovery never stops. Even after finishing it, I instantly wanted to start again. For me, Elden Ring isn't just a great Souls-like, it's a masterpiece, and one of the best games I've ever played. Sekiro pushed me harder than almost any game I've played, but that's exactly why it became a masterpiece for me. The combat isn't like Dark Souls, where you can choose a build or playstyle. Sekiro forces you to learn its rhythm, to parry, break posture, and fight like a true shinobi. At first it felt brutal, but the moment it finally clicked, every duel became unforgettable. The stealth, the grappling hook, the tight level design, all of it made exploring Japan's war-torn valleys and temples feel incredible. It's a focused personal story, and even though the game gives you fewer options, the payoff is huge. Once you master its combat, Sekiro reaches a level of intensity few games can match, and that's why I'm placing it in the masterpiece tier. Khazan started strong for me, with its revenge story and stylish presentation, but the more I played, the more I felt the game struggled to keep its momentum. The combat has some cool ideas, like perfect guards and counterattacks, and once you unlock more skills, the moveset becomes deeper, but early on it feels stiff, and the regular enemies aren't fun to fight. The bosses are the highlight, tough, creative, and thankfully placed right next to checkpoints, but everything between them can feel repetitive. The build and gear systems have potential, but a lot of the loot feels pointless until much later. It looks great and runs smoothly, but overall, Khazan never fully clicked with me, which is why I'm placing it in the mediocre tier. Nioh 2 hooked me faster than I expected. The combat is deep, fast, and incredibly flexible, and once I understood how all the stances, skills, magic, and yokai abilities work together, I couldn't put the game down. I love how every weapon feels unique, and the build options let me solve tough fights in so many different ways. Some bosses pushed me hard, but the game always felt fair, and changing my setup usually made all the difference. The story and music didn't leave a big impact on me, but the gameplay more than made up for it. Nioh 2 kept me obsessed for hours at a time, and that's why I'm placing it in the excellent tier. Death's Gambit Afterlife was a tougher game than I expected, but it really surprised me in a good way. The mix of Souls-like combat and Metroidvania exploration kept me hooked, especially as I unlocked new moves and opened up areas I couldn't reach before. Some bosses absolutely destroyed me, but finally beating them felt amazing and made the struggle worth it. I liked building Soren in my own way, swapping weapons and shaping my skills as I went. The story isn't perfect, but the world, the atmosphere, and the soundtrack pulled me in, and the wins felt genuinely earned. Overall, it's a challenging but rewarding experience, and that's why I'm placing it in the great tier.